minute, and then I'm just going to jump in because I know this is a really weird night. I meant to do this last night, but I was still trying to find my mics. I have a couple of them here. They don't work. Each time I'm just going to try a different mic, basically. And I tried to up this one volume-wise, so hopefully it's not too loud, so just adjust it accordingly. Okay. We'll give it to 7 on the nose. This is just going to be a quick look-see at layers, and this is when my cats play, so where is he? I think you can see him kind of. There he is. That's Moose. So the cats are going to be bad. It's the worst time of traffic on my street, so this should be interesting. But I'm going to, let's see, where's the timer at? Let's give it another 30 seconds. And then I'll jump in. Just as a setup, I do have Photoshop up. If for some reason your postage person doesn't come through, I'll be sending you this image, so it will be familiar. And I also have a couple other images that we may pop in just so that we can have a little bit of fun with the layers. All right. 7 on the nose. Let's go for it. That way you can have your evening. But like I said, Thursday was when I'd planned on doing this, but we had the mic problem. So I have upped the volume. I think that looks okay as far as the meters going. But if it is loud, just dial it down. I know I speak loud, and then when I get excited, I get even more loud. So I'm sorry. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. Tonight, I wanted to look at layers with you so that you could see more of what the layer styles could do. Maybe have a little bit more fun with the curves. I think we looked at that. I think that was gone over in the actual studio class. And again, apologizing for cats and apologizing for the noise, but let's go ahead and jump in. The image that we have just brought in a photo that I took, and this is in its unedited stage. And some of the things that we were working on is trying to manipulate the image a little bit further than beyond just, we have our color corrections, etc. But what happens if you want to go and do a little bit more to it? Now, one thing I do that might be slightly different than most people, and that's because I'm kind of paranoid when I work, is I don't like to touch the background. I do a right click and I like to duplicate. And I'm just going to keep it as, well, let's change it. Let's call it old shed so that we know which one we're working with. So if I mess up, this one's going to be much easier to delete than actually going and, doing a full revert back. Now, if that does happen, under File, under Revert, so it looks like it's also F12 if you're a quick key user. Revert will take it back to the original last saved version. And it's that keyword there, the last saved, that can be the tricky one. If you haven't saved, great. You're going to go right back to the original. But if you've done a couple saves, it'll just take it to that last one. So I like to save pretty frequently, so I just work with the duplicates. So it's just going to depend on your work style. And I'm going to do one more duplicate layer. All right, and I'm just going to leave the copy on there so I know that I have it, because what I'm going to do with this one is going to flip it, and then we're going to play around with some layer styles and have some fun with it. So under Edit, we have this Transform menu, and it has all sorts of options under it. Scale, Rotate, Skew, Distort, Perspective, Warp, Rotate 180, Clockwise, Counterclockwise, and then our flips. For this one, I am going to do a flip. I am a horizontal vertical confuser as well as north, east, south, west. So for me, if I get it wrong, apologize. Horizontal, that's the right one. And now it's just basically taking it, if we were working in the dark room, we're just taking the negative and it would have been spun around so that we're seeing it on its reversal. And right now it's not too exciting. You're like, okay, so it's flipped, who cares? That's because nothing's happened to it. It's still at the 100% opacity. It's still at the normal layer style. Nothing crazy is happening. One of the beautiful things, and I know Photoshop is predominantly known for its filters, and we will get to that. I'm going to save that for probably Tuesday. Filters are one of those things, if you want to use them, and I'm going to say there's probably the key word, if you want to. You can smell a filter a mile away. It's more what more you do to that. It's sort of like a critique. You can say, well, I like that. Well, okay, I like it because, here's the watercolor filter because then I added all of this to it. So we're going to get to filters. With the filters, it's going to be the same steps. Also, I work on duplicate layers with that, but it's the what's more. So it's normal. It's 100% opacity. Let's just see what the opacity does. Okay, that's getting a little bit more interesting. More of a ghosting to that, and you can sort of pop it around. I would say this would be akin to in the darkroom. You're just layering two negatives on top of each other so that you sort of get a dual exposure, not necessarily the double exposure, but you'll be able to see the two images as one. So around the 50% would be normal for that effect. But for this, let's just take it up to that 100%. So the magic, just like with the filters, the magic is under the layer styles. So where the normal is, and also, you're not going to remember what each of these do right off the bat. You're going to find your favorites. My favorite is typically multiply and overlay for what I do in my work. But some of the funkier stuff at the bottom, like the difference through the luminosity, if you want something that has more of a edgy slash, I think one of the words was sinister, that sinister appeal, you might be more in that area. So dissolve, and you're going to be like, okay, nothing's happening. It's okay. So what I usually have students do is on this stage, just sort of pop through each of them. And I have this highlighted, and you can use your up and down arrow. So it's going to make life a little bit easier for when you're bouncing around. So, okay, normal, nothing. It's just how you brought it in. Dissolve, in this case, nada. Darken. Okay, now we're getting a little bit interesting. Multiply. So this is more of a sort of congealed between the two. That and multiply and overlay are going to have similar feels to it. Color burn. It's going to take similar colors and it's going to actually burn through. Think of this as like what we were talking about the last time, the dodge, the burn, etc. This is the old school photo exposure darkroom techniques. Linear burn. Darker color. Lighten and screen have a lot of applications within the more creative aspects. Also, if you look up double exposure tutorials, you're probably going to be working with lighten and screen a lot. Dodge, another dodge, lighter color, overlay. So you can see the similarity between that and multiply. Multiply sort of darkens a little bit. Overlay just keeps it pretty neutral. Soft light, hard light, vivid light, linear light. You're like, I'm never going to remember these. Probably not. Just pop through them like I'm doing. Ooh, sinister. So remember I said around difference, we start getting the more darker effects, the more visually interesting ones, I'll say, where the other ones are more early style photographic darkroom techniques. This is more like the land of the polarized. Subtract, divide, hue, saturation, color, luminosity. So for these, just remember it's the top layer that's interacting with whatever's happening underneath. So if we put an effect on this, let's go with difference because we can really see this on the screen. So if we go with this, this layer, I'll turn. So this layer is talking to the layer that's underneath. So think of this as more of a gelatinous state, and the one behind it is going to be the steady one. Something that you can also do, I'm going to add a weird color. So when I do demos, I should also say this, I choose the more extreme versions so that you can see what's happening, because if it's just muted, it's a little bit trickier to see on the screen. So I'll either take it all the way down or all the way up, just so that you can see the difference between the two. So I'm going to pick magenta, because I'm going to guess that's going to probably stand out pretty well. We have our background, the old shed, that's our original and then that copy. And I'm going to add another layer. So I don't know if you've worked much with the layers yet. You can trash the layer. You can make a new layer. Let me get my mouse out of the way. You can put a grouping on this layer. This one is going to add different effects on that layer. This one is going to be more mask oriented. And this one is going to add a layer style. So if you have, this one comes in handy, especially with type, like if you wanted a drop shadow on that type, which sometimes does come in handy, or if you want an outer glow on it, it can come in handy. Oops, I don't want to make a mask of that. Undo is your best friend, don't forget. And under this one, you can see we have some of the similarities of what we just had, but it's going to give us some of our filter styles, our inverts, and our brightness contrast levels curves. So we can do a quick jump here. So remember I said, you know, what's happening on the top is probably also happening in a couple different spots. This is one of those cases. Some people prefer to work with that menu rather than popping up and adjusting curves up there. So you can do it down here also. It's just going to depend on your work style. Well, let's make a new layer, and it's just going to say layer 1. So one of the things that I like to talk about, since it's the early stages of layers, this gets us in trouble in the early stages. Layer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 30, 90. Okay, what are each of those? So early in, just get used to layer management. So layer management is just sort of like what we did here. I called it old shed instead of background copy, because if I hadn't changed that, it would have been background, background copy, background copy, copy. And then eventually it just keeps going on from there. So what I would do is just go ahead, you know, rename it. Sorry. I'm usually on a Mac. I should probably preface that. So you can rename it and you can see here's all of our duplicates, etc. You should be able to just click on that. Thanks, Mr. Mouse. And rename it. I'm just going to skip this part. It's been a long day. Come on. Hey, there we go. So when in doubt, click 90 times, apparently. All right, so I'm going to call this magenta. You should on your computer, you won't have this problem because you probably have a nicer mouse than I. You will sort of hover your, it'll be like the grippy hand there, and when you hit enter or if you double click, it should open that field and you'll have no trouble. So this is going to be the magenta one. I'm going to change the gradient to the paint bucket tool. I'm going to show both. That way you can see what each of these do. So the paint bucket fills everything in. Whew, that just woke us all up. Sorry about that. I wasn't thinking of that. So the magenta is going to flood through it. Let's just dial that down a little bit since it's late. Let's go into our layer styles. And just so that we can see what happens is that magenta is going to be the one that's talking to the next under. So it becomes this sort of hierarchy of talking. And then that magenta look is going to pop through it. So in some of these, like the screen, it's going to have, if you're in film photography and you have your camera and you can put those gels or the filters on it, and back in the explorative era, you could put the saran wrap that was like red, blue, green, yellow, and people would just sort of put it on their lens like a filter, and you could get effects like this. So it's just a color talking to that image and seeing how it interacts with it. And what I like about this system, well, that's kind of interesting. And again, when I do something like this, and it was what I was saying in some of your the comments when I was doing the reviews, just play, explore, make a new file and just goof off in it. Like, I'm walking into this with zero expectations, but I'm sort of going, oh, okay, that's interesting. But if I change, where was it? Nope, we'll just go with it. But if I change it to a blue, what does that do? Or a bright red, then how does that interact with it? I like to do, so if I was having a project, I would do the project and then have a little bit of playtime with one of your own images and just see what happens to it. Since I called that layer magenta, let's go back to magenta. There we go. And remember, our history, will do everything that we've done since our file opened, or you can keep doing undos, Control or Command Z the whole way back through it. So you can use plain colors, and I'm going to hide this layer so you can hide the layers. And what's nice with this, and I'm just going to chuck that, you can click, hold, and drag, and it turns everything off, or click, hold, and drag, and you can turn everything back on, or you can just do one individually. So we only have 4 layers. You might not need to do the slide, but if you have 50 layers, you might need to, and if you're not a grouper, because you can put these all in a folder and call it a group. It's nice to be able to sort of slide through things quickly. Or like this, I don't really care if I see the background, so I'm just going to leave that off. Background layer by default is always unlocked. If you Control double click, it will remove that. So if you need to get to your background layer and it isn't letting you, and I am going to undo that because I like my background locked, just remember it's Control or Command and then just double click. So there you go. I'm going to hide magenta also. Make another layer. Is it going to let me type it? Look, it let me that time. I'm going to call this one gradient. And then under our paint bucket is the gradient tool. So let's just do a different color to make life more interesting. For this one, and I'm going to do some undos when I work on this, because it's sort of like a gradient is a swash over it, but if you don't quite get it right or you want a different angle, you're probably either going to have to undo it or just delete that layer. So wherever you click and drag, so it starts and then you can click and drag and it's going to flood that area. If I want it to go from top to bottom at an angle, the longer the gradient stretch, the more it's going to flood it. And I'll just do a little one. And then that one's just going to give a little bit. If I don't undo it, and I just do, or maybe I want to do a little bit more, you can get multiple gradients all on the same one. But remember, it's sort of like paint on a canvas. It just stays there. If you want to keep that line, so you can see right now it's going all sorts of willy-nilly. If I hold down my Shift key, it's going to constrain it, and I'm going to get a really nice flooding of that gradient. And what could be nice in your experiments is whenever you have your layer styles, I feel like I should get rid of some of the funkier ones so we can see it. There we go. Under our layer styles, you can create a nice sort of haze with this. And the times that it comes in handy, let's say you're building a poster. All right, I am actually going to make a new document real quick. Let me unlock that first. All right. All right, so I'm going to bring this one in. And let's say our client wants the image at the bottom and then the text is going to flow to the top. So, and it's going to be poster size, which is 11 by 17 for our story. So for this, we're going to go into image size. And I'm just going to flip these, the foreground and the background colors, because when I make the new canvas, it's going to dump that background color onto it. And then I have one less step to worry about. So under our canvas size, they want the barn on the bottom. So I'm going to click on the bottom middle so our photo stays at the bottom. Oh my God, that photo is giant. Let me change that size quick, or I might blow my computer up. When I said it was raw, it was really raw. All right, let's go 10 by 6. Actually, let's just talk about this. So this photo, image size, it's 84 by 55 inches. Great for high quality printing. A nightmare if I'm going to triple the size, which I almost did without paying attention. And it's, decently sized. In Photoshop, for quality, your resolution in theory should never be bumped up because some of your presses are going to want to be around a 300, and 72 is a screen DPI, or a PPI in this case. So 72 is web, whatever is going to be viewed here on the internet or on a screen. So the only time you can sort of change that, so I'm going to want it to be 300. And you can see it's giant now. If the resolution goes up, the rest of it has to go way down, which I do want it to go way down because I don't want it to be magnificently large. And if our poster is 11 by 17, let's just go ahead and make it 11. Then I know I have the perfect width already. The size is way better right off the bat. And our resolution, we're not going to be able to notice a real change in this case because it was so giant. Even though we shrunk the size and made the DPI bigger, it sort of balanced each other. The exercise 1 where we did the pixelation is like the worst case scenario of that. Like you're changing the resolution or the size and you're just losing all the info. In this case, for print publishing, if you're photo like that, because I shoot in RAW, if you shoot in RAW, your files are giant so that all that info's there. So that's probably the one caveat you will have with this, so you won't have to worry about that size. Image, after all that, so we don't blow our computer up and crash the stream. Much better size. All right, we want the barn on the bottom. The width we just fixed, it's all right, and the height was going to be 11 by 17. I'm going to hit OK. Command or Control 0 so that we get it back, and it remembered our background. So if I hadn't had that weird blue one there, it would have just been either black or, if it was default, white and black. I'm going to switch those so that's my foreground again. So where this comes in handy is I'm going to make a new layer. I would have changed all those names. We have this really strange sort of transition here, and they wanted, in this case, let's pretend a teal. Hold down our shift, and we're going to get that nice gradient flow to that. At the top, you're going to see, by default, Photoshop should give it to you as foreground to transparent. So it's your foreground color to a transparent. But there are other options. So it's foreground to background, black, white, complementary colors or the next couple, more prisms, some stripes, etc. So you do have some preset gradients in there. I find myself floating between just a couple that I know I'm going to use a lot. So if this was going to be my poster, I could go ahead, ship it out. If I wanted to play around with that layer style, you could. But the gradient's a nice tool. So if you need to fuzz some of that info away for a design, it's going to give you the flexibility of that. So gradient tools can be fun. So let's go to the more fun ones. This one's going to be weird. Let's go for it. This is a weird, crazy night. Woo! Okay, so this one is a lot more, a little bit crazy. But when we have some fun with our layer styles, if this photo was all, one image, that interaction of the colors you can have a lot of fun with. So something interesting is happening right around here, so maybe I would pause. One thing you can do, I would have saved, but I'm going to flatten the image. Something that you can also do if you get something you really, really like I really like what's happening here. I can just go and copy it. Well, let's make sure that's off. Copy it, paste it, make sure it's on the right layer. I'm going to toss it to the front so we can see it. Free transform is Command or Control T. Let's make life easier. Alt or Option on a Mac, you can just grow it from the center point out. And now we have our own unique, let's get on the right tool, our own unique background that we've made from a sampling from another area. And you guessed it, we can go all sorts of crazy with our layer styles on that one too. So really, the sky's the limit on this. If you can find a little sample of something, now maybe you're like, whoa, I like what's happening here. I keep all these weird experiments and then I come back later and grab them. And this came with the glitch one. I keep all my glitches because I like to see how my photos actually glitch. But sometimes there's this really sweet area where, and some of you were getting on these really unique patterns and bandings on it. You have an instant texture for whatever it is you're working on. So instead of going and buying it, you can always go and buy textures and stuff, or you can make your own. And that's what I like to do. So from something weird like this that was a complete random, just toss this around and then, change that gradient, I got a sampling that looks really cool for whatever it is I'm working on. One more random on our gradients. There's also other options up here. So this one is a radial. I'll keep it on the rainbow just so that it's really bright. Sorry. This one has a diagonal line intersection. This makes for a great texture also. I'm just going to toss another layer in here. I'm probably getting a couple too many, so let's turn those off. But these can be great. Let's say you're doing, again, a poster design, and now your type can go down one side, and you're getting these weird gradient style patterns, and you guessed it, you could create another layer, do the same thing, crazier effect, and just keep stacking them from there. So you can really have ownership over your imagery instead of dependent, and there's nothing wrong with like buying things on Creative Market, etc., but you can make your own also and have a lot of fun while doing it. This is more of the banding one. And what's this one? I'm going to assume diamond pattern it looks like. So each of these you can sort of play around with. Same dealio. Let's say, you know, the next one's going to be that sort of burst. Change our layer style. And you can tell some of these can start getting really abstracted. That one just totally disappears with the image. So that might be something you're looking for. Something interesting is happening with that pink and the sort of squares. It looks like they're stacking. So you can just explore and play and have fun with that part. I sometimes will toss layers I'm not happy with or slide them off, and you're back to basically where we started with that. And never worry about your default. It will remember the last one you used, but when you click on that little drop down menu, you can go back to whatever it was that you were working on with that. And don't worry about that also, because I'm on a hidden layer, so it got confused. It's like, you can't use this, it's hidden. So for that, you know, you can use your own images, you can blend. We could have had flipped shed, the cottage that they had, a couple trees, 7 different images in that, been able to rearrange it and had this really crazy amalgamation with it. Another thing, and I'm just going to slide this down and grab this. If you, because I know we have a couple people who are like painterly, drawer, sculptor style people. One thing I like to talk about is what happens if you do your own mark making or sketches, because I know some of you are into drawing in sort of illustration animation. What happens if you bring your own work into this? So whenever I'm painting, I keep scrap paper around, so whenever I clean my brush, I just make these weird sort of circles and patterns, because I'm like, I can use them for something down the line, and I have stacks of these flowing in the studio. I'm going to select all, I'm going to copy, I'm going to paste it into this one. You know, right now you're like, ooh, that looks great. Rotate it, and I'm going to hold that shift key, and I'm going to undo that so we can see it. If I don't have my shift key, I can move that however I want. If I hold that shift key down, it's going to constrain those proportions. I'm on a PC, so it's out. It's going to draw it out from the middle, and I'm going to undo that. If I don't, it's just going to grab it from a corner. So it's just going to depend on your work style. Mac, I believe it is the Option key. So again, I'm just going to draw it from that center. You could fill the page with it, whatever you want. All right, I'm going to put that over there. And you guessed it, layer styles. So darken, multiply. You can just pop through each of them. Something interesting is happening there right off the bat. Like, what if you start doing a poster or something typographic? You can use this as more of the background imagery for it instead of having the whole picture with it. And what I like is you can see the brushwork. I'm pointing. You can't see me pointing on here. So you can see the brushwork on here. There we go. So like in this area, I like that the barn is sort of bleeding through that. So something's good, interesting there. So it can more fade. You can go into the more crazy effects with it and get those overlaps. Something was nice with that. So I'm just going to pick on this one. But maybe whatever this polarization is here, or this sort of magenta green patterning there, the same thing as what we just did. You can then sample that and use that as a texture later down the line. So I really think while filters gets the credit of being what Photoshop is sort of about. I really disagree with that. I think it's the layers and the layer styles working together that is really the magic of Photoshop, and that's where you can really command it and make it your own for your design work. So what I would say, if you have some spare time this week, and I know life is crazy and busy and hectic, but if you do have some spare time this week, maybe just, bring in one of your photos from your phone, maybe 2 of them, and start really playing around with the layer styles and seeing how sorts of crazy can you go with it. What happens if you add a magenta layer, or a colored layer, or this weird, and I'm just going to turn this layer off so we can see it, or the weird gradients, and see what the gradients can do. And we'll get further in on the gradients. Gradients are kind of a beast on their own because you can start building your own colors out of them. So that was just our defaults. There's a whole lot more with that. And that translates into Illustrator and InDesign down the line also. And that was our nice texture that we got out of it. And because I've kept all of these, I can sort of pick and choose. I mean, that's kind of that boho dreamy look that everyone's, sort of marketing on right now. Our own texture on the photo that we took, and it's actually just 2 layers. It's the shed and that texture that we just made, and we got a really interesting image out of that. So you can really own this and make it your own. So I would say just take some time and keep playing with those layer styles and see, what happens if you start painting over it, because we haven't even really talked about brushes yet. So what happens, and you can see that got interesting right away. What happens if you paint and then bring in the layer styles on top of that? So maybe something like that. And then you have, an interesting poster or a social media post, or it could keep building up from there. So hopefully this was helpful. Sorry it was on a Friday, not the Thursday. It's highly doubtful I'll do a Friday again. Gosh darn you, Mike, for not working. I'm going to shoot for probably a Tuesday on the next time. But as usual, if you have any questions for the next time, don't forget you can put them either in Discord or on one of the announcements saying, what I'd really like to learn is X, Y, and Z. But just play around with layer styles and see what all you can do with that. All right. I hope you have a lovely evening. I will get this posted it'll be automatically on Twitch, so that link will work, and then I'll have it up on YouTube. Thank you for joining, and I hope you have a great evening. All right. I will talk to you later. See ya.